I'm John Wilker, the organizer of 360 IDEP. I hope you enjoy this session recording, but first I wanted to mention one thing. We've served the community since 2009, and over the past few years we've had to take on debt in an effort to keep the conference alive. After several unforeseen challenges, not the least of which is a pandemic of indefinite duration, we've had to make the hard choice to end the conference as we're now facing over $100,000 in debt. As a result of requests from the community of how they can help, we've created a GoFundMe campaign. If you're inclined and able, please consider donating to help keep 360 IDEP going. The QR code after this will link you to the campaign. Thank you. Enjoy the recording.
Hi, welcome to my talk. Today's talk is about the challenges of trying to find a job as an iOS developer in today's climate. First, a little bit about myself. My name is Mitra. I am primarily an artist, podcaster, and a maker. I've been a technical writer for around 20 years, and I'm an iOS developer, 12 years in, and I'm currently the Senior Engineering Manager for iOS at Spot Hero. I'm also a conditional breakpoint. I've played with James and the breakpoints a few times in person and a couple of times remotely. So, one of the things I found interesting about working as an iOS developer over the last 12 years, initially I started out as an independent developer running my own software company, and I would hire developers to come work with me. And around 2015, during the middle of the indie-pocalypse, I decided to re-enter the workforce by looking for a full-time job as an iOS developer. And I'm sure as many of you have thought about doing that, and may already be doing that. What was surprising was that I wasn't prepared for the way that we measure the quality of iOS developers. In my previous experience, you would present your resume when you went to apply for a role, talked about your education, talked about your skills, and the interview would ask you a few questions, and you might talk about some of your past work, do some deep dives on some details, and that was pretty much it. You either got the job or you didn't. Sometimes you'd even start this afternoon if you wanted. What I was surprised about in 2015, I got an interview as an intermediate developer. It's kind of where I thought I was at that time. And I was surprised by the kind of questions that I was being asked. By that time, I'd already written some technical articles on iOS development as an author for RayWinterlick.com. I had published some apps on the App Store. Some of them had been featured by Apple. And I was surprised to be asked some computer science-y related questions unrelated to what I had been doing in iOS. After the interview, I picked up the phone and called my friend Jaime Lopez, and I asked, what the heck just happened? And he said, well, yeah, that's what tech interviews are like these days. You never know what you're going to be asked, and you get in there and they ask you all kinds of technical things. And I have to say, though, through that first interview went pretty well. I mean, the interviewer was pretty generous with his support, and he realized that I didn't quite follow along what he was saying. And he was trying to help me through the code, which was generous, and he was trying to get an idea of what the depth of my knowledge was, right? I thought that was fair. The image on the left represents the joy and delight of building something that you did by yourself. In this case, she's built a freeform Lego piece, and the girl who's created it is pretty pleased with herself. And that's how most of us coming into the magic of mobile development, especially those of us who are self-taught, that's what it's like for us. We're just surprised and delighted with the work we do and the magic of iOS. And yet this next image is what we're asked to answer about in technical interviews, not about how we would assemble an app. Well, maybe they would, but not, the joy we felt assembling the app. We're asked technical jargon, technical details about, the injection molding process and about making a Lego brick. And I've always thought, the analogy for me of our iOS apps is that it's like we're assembling Lego. We're given pieces by Apple gives us and third parties give us, and Xcode code completion helps along with that process. I was surprised to know about the various technical approaches to interviewing. I didn't think about how many roles I've had over my career, over my various careers. I've had several careers by this time in my life, and I'd been, as I mentioned, I've been focused on iOS for 12 years. I started looking to iOS frameworks around 2008 when the SDK first came out. I didn't really get serious about it until 2010 when the iPad came out. I'd been a pizza delivery driver. I'd been a an art director. I'm an Apple evangelist. In fact, I've been an Apple evangelist for a long time, but I officially worked for Apple during the lockdown as an evangelist, which was kind of cool. I've been a manager for most of the roles that I've worked in over my life, and I've been an Apple consultant and an Apple reseller. So I see myself coming from a position of expertise in a lot of ways, right? But in my focused job search, I've actually been surprised over the last 18 months to find out how often we get this sort of sense that for every job, for the majority of jobs you interview for, you're going to get rejected for one reason or another. And I'm taking this Steve Jobs quote out of context here, but it does feel like 1,000 no's for every yes. In the last 18 months, or actually over the last several years, I've applied to 59 roles, and I've been ghosted by nearly half of them. I've applied to quite a number of large companies that were involved with iOS specifically, and out of the 59 applications, I've been in touch with 33 of them. I've interviewed at 5 or 6 of them with at least 5 rounds or more, and out of all of that, I ended up with 3 offers. That's why the title of my talk relates to how many interviews and how many times I've been told no. To be honest, I said no to a few myself. Meaning, when you go for 5 rounds, you might get architectural interview. There may be some behavioral interviews, especially in the case of management jobs. There's usually 2 of those. There's 2 management style interviews, like how to develop career paths and things like that. How you would develop your engineers' career paths. And there's usually 1 or 2 technical interviews where you demonstrate your knowledge and your prowess of the coding that you're asked. If you're going to go for an iOS role, you could have more technical sessions than that, and they're going to be even tougher. But over the last 18 months, those 5-round plus interviews add up to at least 25 hours. I mean, so if you take an hour for every single, even 15 minutes for every call, 39 times or 33 times. My brain's hurting already with the math. Actually, my interview with Facebook stands out. I never imagined in my wildest dream that I would ever want to work for Facebook. But the recruiter was relentless over many, many years, and he'd recently convinced me to give it a shot. I was in the job search mode anyway, so you never know. You get to change the world inside Facebook was the spiel that I was told. And by the time I'd finished those 5 rounds, I'm like, yeah, man, I'm gonna be working for Facebook. This is gonna be great, And they managed to convince me that this is an awesome place to work, and I was really looking forward to it. Like ready to write my resignation letter to my company I was working for, only to find out the next day when I got a call from the recruiter that they were like, "No, sorry, we're not going to go with you." I was stumped. So in terms of like some of the questions, John, I know John said there would be no code in this talk, but John doesn't know me that well. So let's talk about some of the questions that you might get in technical interview. And the one on the left, here's an example you might get, like you'd end up in a CoderPad type application. So in this case here, you're asked to build a framework, and then you enter in the values that you've got there. And this is actually a screenshot from my test, so I don't know. Don't run the code. I don't know if it works or not. Like, you're given some stubs to go through the whole process. It would be kind of challenging for a junior developer, but this is something that you might get asked as a senior developer. The second style of questions, which is kind of cool, is you get a list of questions that you get to choose from. So, the first one is about linked lists, so there's an algorithm type question. The second one is more of a graphic UI, about frames and bounds. The third one is working with arrays of strings. The fourth one, which is more conventional coding stuff that you might get, you'd be doing your daily job. And the fourth one is an interview question that I've used a lot myself, and it's quick to see how you work through a problem. It's not about getting the right answer, and none of these are about getting the right answer. It's more about how you work through a problem. And in the case of any of these type of interviews, the important thing is to ask a lot of questions, get clarification from the interviewer, and ask what the results expected and what the conditions are before you dive in. Pretty much like you would do, talking to a product manager in your daily job kind of thing, right? And just as a side note here, one of my most interesting interviews I had last year was I was interviewed by a company where the interviewer was a Ruby programmer. I'm don't do Ruby. I mean, I've done a little bit of Ruby for Fastlane and stuff like that, but I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination. And the question he laid out to me was written in Ruby. And I explained to him that I'm an iOS developer and I'm going to be writing it in Swift or Objective-C. Which would you like? And to be honest with you, I really don't understand what this question, the way it's formatted, what it's asking me to do. So I asked him to explain it to me, and we probably spent about 20 minutes going through the question just so I understood what, in fact, he was asking me to do. And of course, he knew nothing about Swift or Objective-C, so when I was going through my solution, he had no idea whether I was answering the question correctly or not. Here are some things that you might see on interviews in terms of what you're going to get asked to do. Generally, you'll get some light coding in front of another developer, but again, like I said before, make sure you ask for clarification. I hear a lot about leet code, and you can go through practice exercise to learn all kinds of computer science kind of things, like using those challenges. You can study algorithms at raywunderlich.com. They have a good algorithm book and algorithm sites. Hacking with Swift, of course, for Paul Hudson, is a great place to learn. And he's actually got a test yourself with Swift, and it's written for 3 different levels of Swift. You can go through and do a quick test, which is really kind of cool. HackerRank is another place, and Interview Cake as well. And at the end of the day, like the interview is trying to figure out your technical skill. I mean, how are they supposed to measure it otherwise, right? At least they're supposed to be doing that. That doesn't always seem to make sense, but considering the work we end up having to do day to day, if you're not doing algorithms every day, it's kind of weird to be asked that. So ask the recruiter or the screener before you go in about the kind of work that you're going to be doing every day. If you're going to be doing algorithms every day, ask the recruiter before you go in about the kind of work you're going to do. When interviewing as an artist, for example, I would bring in a portfolio of drawings and paintings and what have you, and we kind of go through to see how talented I am on paper. But if you're a technical writer, do the same thing. You send in articles that you've written. And the editors go through them and see how well you write, and if it goes to you. But how you measure the skill in this case of building an app, how do you do it other than coding? So that's kind of the weird thing, right? You might be asked to do some pair programming. You might be given a code review to work on. You might get, and this is pretty popular, get a take-home test where you take it away, and which a lot of people seem to like. It's closer to the kind of work that we end up doing with the take-home exercise. Try not to spend any more than they might tell you, like to spend 4 hours on it, for example. Beware that sometimes there are traps inside of these coding tests, right? It happened to me once. I checked the requirements, made sure I understood the test, noticed some glaring UI stuff on the view I was working on. I fixed those. I implemented the feature that they wanted me to add. And what I didn't realize is that there was some major memory leaks on the next page, which I didn't really get to, and kind of an odd thing, a little bit underhanded in my opinion, but demonstrates to them the depth of your knowledge and your willingness of your abilities to go in and poke around and do that. But I missed it and I didn't get the job. You might get asked about some documentation. Get asked, like I said before, like to do a framework or about frameworks. Algorithms could come up. I haven't really been asked a lot of algorithm questions in any interviews I've done in 2.5 years. When I'm interviewing, I like to use Google-style puzzles, to like how many golf balls will fit inside of a school bus, kind of questions, just to sort of see how someone would go about approaching sort of an abstract question. You might get asked to how you help your fellow developers, like how you're going to help them on your career path. That's more like a management kind of thing, but still, or as a lead, you might get that. How do you get them unblocked? How do you work with cross-discipline between, UI and testing and design, that kind of things. And those are, like I said, they tend to be more at a lead level. Some questions that I like to fall back on when I'm doing interviews, I might ask you sort of a general iOS stuff, like how does memory management work in Swift? I might ask you about the difference between struct and classes and when you would use one or the other. I might ask you to explain to me about MVP and MVVM, the pros and cons of those. I might ask about data structures of various types. I might ask about file access in Swift. In Swift UI, we now have state objects and we have state. What are the differences between those two? We have observables. We have codable protocol. I might ask you about threading with NS operations and GCD. We could discuss bindings and environment objects with SwiftUI. There are many kind of topics you might get asked, but not about them all at once. There may be a variety of different things that kind of mix it up a bit. but I might bring up functional Swift as well. So, you talk about map and reduce and the new one, compact map. And yeah, and basically those are the kind of things that I would cover in an interview. The next slide is a bit about, this is taken from the Swift style guide. Some of the things in Swift areas that might come up. Self-documenting code, readability is important, naming conventions for classes and types and the difference between them. You could get asked about type inference. You could ask, about trailing closures, about, dry, don't repeat yourself, about mutability and why that's important. You might want to think about braces and how you place them on the lines and tabs. And of course, the big argument whether it's Star Wars or Star Trek, or I guess there should be a third option, which is both, right? And yeah, of course, you might get asked about the ternary operator too. There are different kinds of roles when you're applying for jobs. There's junior intern jobs that are, kind of beginner level, where you have little or no experience as an iOS developer. Might have an intermediate level job where you got 2 or 3 years worth of experience. More senior ones, where you've got 3 or 5 years. There's different, there's levels, so there might be 2 or 3 levels of each of these so far. You might have 3 levels of senior engineer, and then you get into staff engineer, principal engineers, and then on the other side of the coin is the engineering managers, and of course senior engineering managers who are managers who have even more experience than your average everyday guy. One thing I can tell you that's kind of in my years of experience, one of the things that doesn't really come up, but I mean, and you think about this in your path, is when you become a manager, you may not be actually writing a lot of code, which is I think a little surprising for some people, right? So my friend Ellen, speaker here at the conference, oh my God, so many rounds was one of her replies to me on a Slack channel when I was asking some of the other speakers here today about their experiences, and she was interviewing at 3 companies at the time, and 20 or so technical interviews of some type or another, pretty much like I just outlined there. So when it comes to where to look, there are lots of places to find opportunities, but I did a couple of surveys with some other developers for this talk, and one place that I like a lot is hired.com. What I like about Hired is you put your skills and your expectations up on the Hired site, and the employers come to you to apply, which is nice. So they get to look through your stuff and decide whether or not you're a fit, rather than and then you can go and look at what they're doing and away you go. So I've just full disclosure, I've promoted my profile on Hired a number of times, several times over the last couple of years, and my friend Jaime Lopez has had a lot more experience with Hired than I have. I mean, a lot more luck with Hired than I have. Probably get 2 or 3 decent interviews out of that. In fact, happy to say I finally landed a job through Hired, which is great. They're not going to waste your time if you haven't got the chops that they're looking for. Yeah, for example, I'm a Apple fanboy, so one of the things I want to find out right early is whether or not it's React Native. I prefer native stuff. That's I just like the way Apple puts things together, and I prefer to work within those in that way. Another great place to look is LinkedIn. People I've surveyed all agreed LinkedIn is a great place to look. It's got one of the highest ratings from in terms of where people would look for things. And I'm going to go through this in a little bit, but you should optimize your LinkedIn profile to make sure you're presenting yourself with your best foot. With LinkedIn, you can set up an alert to get daily reports on jobs that come up. Some of them will be companies like Apple and Amazon, Meta, Facebook, as well as startups and other smaller companies in the areas that you specify. So if you're in Canada, you're going to get Canada stuff. If you're in the Valley, you're going to get Valley stuff. You can also turn off the location stuff and get jobs around the world. You can do generic job searches like Indeed is one place, or Monster Jobs. I don't know if people even use Monster Jobs anymore. Friends. Your friends are a great place to find out where to find jobs. And there's one of the side things of that is Slack channels. There's a lot of iOS Slack groups out there that are pretty good. You can get invited to join them. And you can have a job board. Many of them have job boards, and they people post postings there, and you can talk to the developer directly about the kind of thing. And sometimes on Twitter you'll see occasionally other developers will post that, their team is hiring and their DMs are open if you want to find out about the role and stuff like that. So that's kind of a cool thing. So when it comes to your profile, you really need to focus your profile while you're doing a job search. For years, I've had an old school type resume where, I listed every single job I ever had, listed a pile of skills that I always had in there, tools that I worked with over the years. My education was down at the bottom, and a bunch of hobbies and things like that. And what I found was I wasn't really getting a lot of callbacks from that. It was just too much information, right? So I recently pared it down to like the bare essentials, and I basically tuned it specifically for looking for either iOS developer or iOS engineer managing jobs. If you're on socials, like I'm on Twitter all the time, I try to steer away from edgy subject matter, and it's not a party place that I go and post about that. Try not to make too many jokes other than iOS jokes. Yeah, I use it for marketing. I mean, I've been marketing the podcast and stuff like that for many years on there, and but I've used Twitter and YouTube as well to build up sort of a presence. I use it for promoting the podcast that I'm on, and one specifically on iOS called More Than Just Code, by the way. Definitely check that out. So you want your resume to be reflective of who you want to be presented as. So here's my old school resume. You can see, like, let me just zoom in here. Got I had all this verbiage about all the different things I've done and places I've been and things like that, and you can see 4 pages long, and I think people probably, their eyes get blurry after like the second page, at least mine would. So I went back in and I basically shortened the resume down to 2 pages, so now you've got, a nice little tight resume. You've got, your paragraph about yourself, sort of a mission statement, if you will. And then you've got your basic rules you've got here. And then I just summed up all the rest of the work into like additional things. If somebody wants to ask me about running an art department, I can talk about that. Then specifically iOS skills that are related to the job, how long you've been doing Swift and Objective-C, that kind of stuff. Then other publications that you've been on, or been involved in, and conference talks you might have given if you've done that. And down here at the bottom, your education. I actually had somebody with like an intermediate come to me a few years ago, and he was applying for a job, and he had his education at the very top. And I said, I wasn't going to hire him, but I told him, I said, hey, can I give you some tips on your resume? I would take the education, put it at the bottom, because people want to know, what have you done lately? That's the most important thing. So these are actually jobs that I'm still currently involved in, or at the time when I was applying was currently involved in. So that's why they are at the top of the resume, and the rest is kind of just conversation pieces if people want to know about it. LinkedIn and GitHub. Whether you're applying for a job internally within your own company or you're applying for a job externally, HR managers and hiring managers are going to read your LinkedIn page. So make sure that your LinkedIn page is up to date, and it's tuned to the kind of work you're looking for. Tech interviewers are going to look at your GitHub page as well. So make sure you've got a pretty good looking page over there. Here's the top of my LinkedIn page. At the top, I've got the title I want to be sort of known or associated with, and some jobs I'm working on, some places I'm working on, and it's in there I've got, below that I've got skills that I've done, and again here you can put all the jobs you've ever done in your entire life, because that's kind of what that's all about. On GitHub, you can set up a special README page that has, sort of, it's again tuned in. You've got who you are, you've got what your roles are currently, and you've got, things like, like this talk I'm doing right now, as well as other things I've done. And then below that, then you go down to the bottom and you've got all this repos you work on, and at least the ones that are public and you don't mind sharing, and that kind of stuff. So it's, again, this is a special README file that the folks over at GitHub have set up, so you can go in and do that, right? So another important thing is so you get in the interview, whether it's with the screener interviewer or even in the tech interview, you don't want to go in. I mean, I've had people come into interviews with me, and I'll say, do you have any questions? And they're like, no, I'm good. I'm like, really? So you want to make sure that you've got at least 3 good questions you want to ask, and that's really important. And you'll get like maybe between 5 and 15 minutes, near the end of the interview, to ask your own questions. So hopefully, like some interviews are 45 minutes long, some are an hour long. And if you've got, the 45-minute ones, make sure you've got your questions ready and the way you go. And what's interesting is my CTO at the current company I'm working at now, he gave me half of the interview at the beginning to ask all of my questions, get them all out of the way, and then that way, again, as a manager, he's dealing with the ambiguities of the work and the kind of things that I would want to know as a worker coming in. So that was a great thing. So here's some areas I want to know about when you're being interviewed. I want to know about the work. What kind of work am I going to be doing? What kind of work does, ask about the day in the life of a developer. What does that look like for somebody? What's the tech stack look like? Are we working in native? Are we doing, React Native, Flutter? Is core data involved? Maybe it's a specific job like you're working with HealthKit or something like that. Any third-party frameworks in there. You want to find out about the tools you're going to be working with, like Jira or Trello, Confluence, Monday.com, all those kind of tools that you might be working with. Are the Macs managed? Like these days, it's pretty common for Macs to have some sort of profile on them. I worked in an environment recently where the Macs were completely locked down. We didn't even have admin access, and yet we had tuned it in such a way that the tools that supported the Macs allowed us to install Xcode and all the other tools that we needed to do without having to have admin access, which is kind of cool. It was kind of like you went to a shopping cart and you picked out what you wanted. You want to find out if they're working with Agile and kind of what the ceremonies look like. Are they truly Agile, or are they just sort of calling it Agile? Is it really Wagile? I like to ask about the interviewer's experience, like how did they come to work at this company, and what do they think about it, and like I did with the Facebook guys, it was like, tell me all about it. Why would I want to do this? The really important thing these days is whether you're working remote or hybrid. Are we expected to go in the office at all, or are we in the office? Kind of thing. Work-life balance is probably the most important thing on this slide these days. You want to make sure that and companies know this. I mean, companies know that you need to go away from the work and just recharge your energy. Go, skiing or hiking or something, and deal with life. And so you want to make sure that the expectations aren't going to be unless you're specifically for your role, you're going to be on call occasionally. You want to basically have the time to sort of walk away from work and enjoy life, and go to a concert or walk in the park or take your dog out for a walk. Personal time off, PTO, is important. In some cases it's unlimited PTO. What does that mean? Those questions you would want to ask. Is it, or if it's like a fixed vacation thing, is it 5 weeks or 3 weeks, or what does that look like? And talk about pay in a little bit, but stock options versus restricted stock units. Are you actually getting stock when you apply? Is there an annual bonus involved at the end of performance bonus available at the end? Are you getting a signing bonus when you start? Benefits is another key area that younger developers may not think about, but of course I do. Is medical, dental covered? Is the company paying for that? Am I paying for that? How much? What percentage am I paying for that? In Canada, we have free healthcare. In the United States, you don't. So that's something that's really important to sort of get and ask about, as well as retiring. Are they contributing to 401k or RSP in Canada? Registered retirement savings plans. How does that work? And one of the cool things I had at a previous job is I had a pension, and the company contributed a lot to the pension, and then I basically topped that up. The pensions, pays you out for life, and so those can work out to be, quite valuable by the time you build it all up, right? Compensation is a pretty interesting topic. I was actually surprised. Had a conversation with some of my colleagues on the podcast. I'm Toronto, and I'm working for a conservative company. They were working, one's in Seattle, one down in San Jose, so they're more tuned into what's going on in the Valley or around the United States. There's a lot of discussion about the whole package here. So you really want to make sure that you look at your base pay. You want to look at the value of the benefits you're getting from the company, and any options you might want to have on top of that. When I asked, surveyed the previous developers what they thought about 92% of them did research on salaries before they entered into the job market or even applied to various companies. And if you haven't heard about levels.fyi, it is a better than Glassdoor. It's a place where you can go and find out what different levels of engineers are getting paid. And I'll show you a slide on that in a minute. Hired.com also has a couple of metrics out there. This is sort of an idea around the country and in Canada and the UK in terms of what engineers are making these days. Obviously the valleys, the place where the big tickets are, but then the cost of living is crazy. Austin looks like a good place to work. San Diego, perhaps. Seattle is doing pretty well for developers. Then you got your people in Denver and Chicago, a bit more conservative. Toronto is a little bit lower and that's in Canadian dollars, so that's like, a couple of donuts and a coffee worth of money. Yeah, so you can sort of get a good sense from Hired in terms of what's going on. This is actually some numbers I pulled from levels.fyi. I just grabbed Apple, Facebook, Meta, Google, Amazon, and Uber, for example, and I kind of chose like a middle level engineer kind of role. You can see that the salaries you're getting, are pretty even across the board, pretty high, but pretty even. They're big companies. They're hard to get into, by the way, just in case you're wondering. And the stock that you're getting either as and this is annual stock, so you might get 3 times that. You might get like 3 years worth of stock. So and it's quite a bit, sort of a big number at that as you look at it. And then for bonuses, you've got various kind of annual bonuses as well. So if you look at the total across the bottom, that's kind of sort of what, when you hear these big numbers, this is how those big numbers are made up. These are the FANG companies, the Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google kind of companies that make up the FANG. So another thing too that kind of comes up, and I've asked a few questions about this from people to see what their impressions were, and there's a lot of unconscious bias. I mean, I've spoken to a couple of employment lawyers recently, and they both warned me. I'm older, and they explained to me there's a lot of ageism out there, and there's sexism and various kinds of things. And it's illegal to ask about heritage, relationships, and age, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. Just want to point that out. So. And then there's some statistics here that I pulled from Zippia.com. At this point in time, 80% of the marketplace, or 80% of the working developers out there, engineers, are male, 20% are female. The female number needs to get increased quite a bit. And there's lots of different programs around to try and help that. But, we can all do our bit to be allies. And then when you look at the mix of races, you've got 52% are white, 33% are Asian, and then you've got your black and brown people and your unknowns. Latinos are still pretty low. So there's kind of a big boys club, white boys club kind of thing going on. And then when you get into looking at the ages of developers, still a fair number of developers above 40 years old, and that's 40% of that range of numbers. So there's quite a few older developers still out there. A couple places if you want to basically look into some more information about this stuff. I read the iOS interview guide. It's a pretty good introduction to the kind of things you'll get asked in an iOS interview. I can recommend this book. I think he put it out last year. The Tech Resume Inside Out. This is another good book. Again, these are available online as PDFs. You can pay for them and download them. And if you're looking for a way to practice interviewing techniques, of course they talk about doing mock interviews here. RayWonderluck.com has a number of things. Navigating the iOS interview by Leah Marlock. Acing the iOS interview as well. It's a video course where they actually have sort of mock interviews where you have one person ask a question and another senior developer answering that question to see how they would go about answering those things. And as well, I didn't have a slide, I didn't have a picture but the mocking interview techniques is really kind of good from RayWonderluck.com. And as I mentioned earlier, you can also here's a shot of testing your Swift. This is the thing that Paul Hudson provides on hacking with Swift. You get to go through as a novice or intermediate or an expert, and the questions are not too simple. I mean, like, he's really going to put you through his paces. And of course, he's got the 100 days of Swift you were coming at. 100 Days of Swift, 100 Days of Swift UI, as well as all of his books. If you want to study that kind of stuff, it's pretty well up to date. Paul's very good about keeping that stuff up to date. Anyway, so that's pretty much the talk for today. Thanks for your time. Tune into More Than Just Code podcasts. Check out my YouTube channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And I'm available on Twitter and most things as @TimMitra, at TIMMITRA, as I say in the Twitter machine. That's where you'll find me. And yeah, that's kind of it. So thanks for your time, and I guess we'll have some time for questions and answers.